game face. Is that see, I can't stop smiling. That's just fucking who I
am. V, to persona
Mark.
or not to persona?
That is the
the
question.
question.
Exactly. One of my favorite Shakespeare poems.
He's a smart guy.
Smart guy, that guy.
Yeah. So today we're talking about personas for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, you found some interesting research. So why don't you talk about that, the 50-50 stuff that you're looking at?
Well, it's funny because marketers, you gotta love us, honestly. But there's the death of things everywhere. And when I was doing my prep work for this episode, I was trying to find some good articles like we can cite and whatnot. But it's so funny, just in the search criteria alone, you're finding, is it the death of personas? Why personas no longer make sense? On the flip side, it's like personas are now more valuable than ever in this privacy-induced environment that we all operate in. So it's like we have this push and pull that's happening for the same topic, which I think is stimulating because we're going to talk about it today. And I think you and I also are coming at it from two different places. That kind of shows that there is this little, I don't know what the right word is, but is it actually valuable? Is it not? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll get into it. I mean, for us, well, for you listening, the reason why we got into this is recently is because we had an assignment, recent assignment in class for one of our MBA sections in this final paper, and we had to do the marketing plan for a fictitious company. V's company was goggles, right? Like high-tech
ski and snowboard
goggles.
Yeah.
Then my company makes underwear for travelers. And so each one of us had to, one of the parts of the assignment was to do, aside from a SWOT, which Roger Martin, I always laugh about that when thinking about Roger Martin.
Yeah.
There's one of the sections was on segments and then building personas within your target segments.
Exactly.
And so I really struggled with this because I was sitting there, I have a product that's largely used by everybody.
Yeah.
I think I found some research that was something like only 3% of my
people
markets
don't wear
for
underwear.
France and Germany. Yeah, only 3% of people are go commando. So just about everybody wears underwear. And so then I was really struggling with like, okay, so this is built for travelers, so sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what segments am I going to make? Like the user profiles are not really going to be that different meaningfully. Like gender, sure, there'd be some differences there. But not always, because there's more and more women I found that want to be able to wear men's underwear styles. Maybe that's the boy short. But it's like not, you can go 16-year-olds that you could say would be your target audience. Maybe moms are buying it for them, but then it turns out a lot of women, wives and girlfriends buy for men who are older. You know what I mean? Like it's just trying to find, the traditional like hairy,
happy hairy
42-year-old male who's like a working professional and travels with his family, like in building that. I'm like, well, how is that any different than surprising Sarah, who loves to, also that does all those things, but also likes to backpack? Anyways, just like throw me off. So anyway, that's why we're here to talk about this, because it's not as straightforward as I think you normally would think it would be.
No.
And overall, I don't think it has like SWOTs. Like it's just one of those things that's almost invisible to us because we just have always done it. And so we continue to always do it without really thinking what the point of them are.
And we've accepted it as well, right? So we've done it, we've accepted it as it's just part of the process. And, I think it's funny because, when you and I were originally talking about this in the context of class, I remember very, very vividly, like you were struggling. It's like, I just don't understand how a persona is actually going to help my segmentation in this context. Like, it just doesn't apply. And you even openly challenged the professor as well, which was a great push. But I think that's where there's opportunities, and it's going to be really dependent on the product, the service that, any organization is really positioning. But maybe we quickly reset, and maybe I'm going to start with, well, maybe
Yeah.
Mark, how about you help us just, how do you define a persona?
Um, yeah, I think that's a great place for us to start. So, did a bit of Google search here, and there's this great definition that I found from.
I asked ChatGPT, it
Yeah, I
told me
totally
something
did. Yeah,
else.
it was great. But there's a. I think it was from
SEM Rush?
SEM Rush, maybe that was where I found this, but it's a fictional profile, and we've all seen this picture of a guy or a girl, and we give it a name like Harry Harold or whatever the name was,
Happy Harry.
Happy Harry, Surprising Sarah, those kinds of things, and we
Yeah,
build
yeah,
out
yeah.
a profile on them that is based on market and audience research, but it's supposed to be um, the whole profile, with including their psychographics, their demographics, and some of the behavioral characteristics, are supposed to be an embodiment or a
Hmm.
reflection of the target audience's most important characteristics and traits.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I completely agree with that. And I think for me, just a subtle nuance that kind of shows up in usually in personas that sometimes doesn't come in just simple segmentation analysis is really more details around some of the behavioral patterns of these individuals, their motivations, some of their goals, etc. That really
Mm-hmm.
they're brought to life through through this fictional character that makes it somewhat tangible, and you can kind
Mm-hmm.
of relate. So it could be a friend, it could be your mother, it could be your father. There's ways for us marketers sometimes that we use these personas in a way that helps us craft a story that helps inform things like content, messaging strategies, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Quiz.
we have a definition.
Quiz for you there, V. Uh,
My turn.
quiz for Doc. Okay, so what's the point of a persona?
Ooh, the point of a persona. I didn't use ChatGPT for this,
Okay.
and I'm gonna kind of go off the top of the noggin to try to articulate it the best I can. But in the way I see personas,
Yeah.
and their importance is it really helps businesses understand and empathize with their potential customers.
Okay.
So it helps them align their products, their services. I would even say, it helps inform sometimes R&D and things like that. So it's really there to align, the needs and desires of a consumer, even identifying things like pain points as well,
Mm-hmm.
I think is extremely important. But it makes their audience, it humanizes the audience in some capacity, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're half jokingly calling this one of the individuals Happy Harry, but the moment that you create a profile or a biography around, hey, who is this Happy Harry? We're naturally storytellers. It helps us humanize who it is that we're actually targeting from uh, a, I guess, strategy perspective. So that's how I would define it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Am I close? Did I pass?
No, I think, I mean, it's a good definition. I think it's a really yeah, it's a good definition. And I agree. Like, I think that's how I have thought about personas for a long time.
Hmm.
Um and, m- part of where this like
Short
short
circuit.
circuit happened for me was like I was thinking about the underwear category. I was trying to think about a Happy Harry or a Surprising Sally or whatever the thing was.
Yeah.
But and as I alluded to before, I was looking at how to segment the market first. So the
Hmm.
market in my particular case of underwear was anyone who buys underwear.
Yeah.
And then subset of that is anyone who travels and buys underwear. So the traveling thing is the key component, right?
Right.
To create my market segment. It doesn't mean that people can't who don't travel can't buy the product. It just means that we're
Of course.
designing the product and the messaging around people who are travelers.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, I was like, okay, well, so we're not, because it's designed and built for travelers, we're not targeting people um, who want cotton because the fabric and materials, the wicking and capabilities and all that kind of
Yeah.
stretching, you have better materials than cotton for that. So we're eliminating cotton. And then we're looking at the target market and looking at the styles they have. So we're picking
Sure.
specific styles of that are most popular to
Hmm.
um, enter the market in. And so with all that stuff, like I created, now we have different filters. So there's a traveler, then there's fabric type, then there's style type,
Hmm.
and then there's men versus women. There's just pure uh, anatomy, just
Yeah.
differences.
Yeah.
So there's like a pouch for guys and flat front for girls.
Yeah.
Um, and so then beyond that, when we were trying to figure out, well, what are these individual personas that we're going to create? Because you could have a 16-year-old kid, like my nephew's 16 and he's 6'3". He
Yeah.
wears, for sure, he wears adult underwear. He's not wearing like 6X
No.
boys, right?
That's probably not.
Yeah. And I also have a friend who's like 48, but he's like 5'2", and
Yeah.
he's tiny. Like he might actually wear kid size underwear.
Yeah.
So like going by age didn't really help. Gender kind of helps with just the style,
Yeah.
but not necessarily the triggers that start the point of entry for purchase. So then that's where I was kind of just struggling because I felt compelled to make Happy Harry and the Surprising Sally,
Yeah.
but I couldn't think of a meaningful way to make them different enough to be actionable.
No, and I think this is where you raise a really valid point. Is, well, maybe not. Are all personas created equally, or do you always need a persona to do an effective targeting strategy?
Right.
Right. So I think the product that you're highlighting is almost like a a really clear example to say that, you know what, because of the adoption of this product across both genders, doesn't make real sense outside of styling, right? But you could create content strategies that's bringing both genders together anyway, so you make it inclusive. So that's not, you can get around that,
Mm-hmm.
where you're not forced to actually go hyper focused on what does a persona look like, because it's not
Mm-hmm.
going to add any further value to your segmentation or your targeting strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I reflect on my exercise, where it was, sorry, my groups and my exercise around ski snowboard goggles, they're advanced AI, they have an integration with augmented reality, beacons, like all the fancy like tech
Yeah.
stuff. For us, there was an opportunity there to kind of help tell that story, and we created three personas, because one thing we did realize, like you, ski and snowboard goggles, they can be widely adopted by a lot of different ages. So it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make sense to try to exclude, you know, peripheral ages. But we also understand, because this is high tech, you're going to be alienating some that just don't have the disposable income to come in. So we thought by doing the persona exercise actually helped us define a lot closer who we wanted to target. So we came up with three. One was the, highly active outdoor enthusiast. We called him Active Adam. Then we had a moderately active outdoor enthusiast, and it's Moderate Mary. And I can hear everyone laughing at these names. I'm sorry, we didn't put too much thought into what we called them. And recreational outdoor enthusiast, recreational Richard. God damn it, there he is. So for us, doing that exercise really helped bring to life some of the subsequent material that we created around, the ads, etc. Just because, again, a recreational Richard could be someone who's semi-retired, still has a high disposable income, and just enjoys being out on the slopes, where you have someone that's a highly active outdoor enthusiast that's chasing,
Mm-hmm.
the epitome of carving up the slopes, either skiing or snowboarding alike.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it actually helped us kind of not only story tell who it is that we were going after, but it helped add a layer of segmentation, if you will, that didn't exist, just saying, we just want to target skiers, men,
Yeah.
women, 50-50, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. I can get your point for sure. My, again, thinking about some of those like your recreational Richard and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
I could have, and I was trying to think about this. Like I could have gone down that path of doing like a version of Adventure Johnny and Serious Traveler Sarah and
Yeah.
whatever. But then the only way that would really make sense to me would be the kinds of travel. So business travel. So maybe
Interesting.
business travel Barry, and then beach vacation Bobby, and
I love it.
adventure seeking Siegfried. I don't know.
Would you have
But
one like Commando Chad that just sits on the like
yeah.
the outskirts?
He's nobody's friend.
Nobody wants to talk to him. Sorry.
But so the challenge I have with like going down that path is that when I was looking at the sales volume year round, like you look at
Yeah.
any publicly traded company and there's underwear being bought every single day,
Yeah, totally.
right?
Literally.
And so there's spikes for sure in underwear
Hmm.
searches. When we were looking in France and Germany on Google search and Google Trends, there was a spike in the spring, a spike in the summer, and a spike in November. So
Hmm.
spring break, I'm assuming there's some correlation there as an event driven reason to purchase underwear.
People lose underwear during spring break.
Right.
Got to
You
replace
need
it.
more. So there's a spring like travel period. There's a summer travel period, which is big
Yeah.
for Europeans, and then in the fall, the November one was closely related to Black Friday, Cyber Monday.
Sure.
So, but it never the search volumes for underwear never reach zero. So you
Right.
have people that are business travelers, that are truck drivers, that are vacationers, that are
Hmm.
backpackers, doing all kinds of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
There's higher percentages that maybe do it at specific times of the year. And as a business traveler, a survey of one, so I'm this
Yeah.
guy,
Yeah.
but I have been a business traveler, and I also travel for pleasure, sometimes with friends to vacation for sports things,
Yeah.
sometimes with family to go to beaches,
Hmm.
sometimes with I don't know, colleagues on work trips or something. Like so I don't fit in one persona either. So that was,
No.
you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
think my thought was I can just target the needs that people have, like the category entry points, as
Yeah.
opposed to and create messaging around that, as opposed to creating some fictitious persona that I like that is has a ton of overlap with the other personas.
Yeah. Man, I love your example here because like again on my side of things, it's a very seasonal product. So the moment that it's seasonal, ski and snowboard seasons are consistent in terms of like when that is every year. So when we were looking at Google Trends, again, we saw obviously the spike start happening the climbing around October. Peak was happening January, February. Then subsequently, the season starts winding down and you start losing the demand. So we have a smaller window to make sure that you're building the affinity, the brand awareness, and I would even argue, like that recognition, especially as a new product entering the market, where you
Mm-hmm.
have to really kind of flood. Where again, when I think about it around our product, the personification of our targeting strategy helps identify the core audience a lot maybe quicker, so
Mm-hmm.
we can get there in terms of when media strategies, because again the personas for us were a catalyst in terms of how each persona kind of consumes media. So if we go back to recreational Richard, probably using semi-retired, maybe using some more traditional forms of media. Is that an audience we want to chase, or do we want to stay digitally focused and really target say the active Adam as a highly active
Mm-hmm.
outdoor enthusiast? And maybe it kind of helps bringing the rest of the segmentation, the rest of the personas along as well. Because we do, and maybe we should quickly talk about this, but we had a very similar experience when we worked for Sport Check, where we had they weren't personas, but we had very clear um, uh, audience segments, I guess is the right
Mm-hmm.
way is the right
Mm-hmm.
way to say it. I'm trying to remember. It's like highly active. I don't know why I keep forgetting the sub ones, but it's like highly active, outdoor, and no, not
Outdoor
outdoor.
achiever. Sorry, there's a high-end achievers,
High end
outdoor
achiever.
enthusiasts. There was the fan category, which is just people that bought
Yeah,
like fan gear and weren't very active.
yeah,
But there was two other ones too. I can't remember what they were.
yeah. Disengaged inactives and the health and fitness enthusiasts.
Right.
So yeah, sorry, it was high end achievers, aspiring achievers. We had five, one, two,
I
three,
think so.
six. We had six.
Oh,
However, our the the the, the company was aligned that we were targeting the high end achievers
right.
because the idea was by targeting them and speaking to them, messaging to them, you'd have the rest of the segmentation, the rest of the audiences that are aspiring to be, say, that would
Mm-hmm.
naturally just kind of lift the rest of the, I don't know, the boat. Is that what they say? They naturally lift the
Yeah.
boat.
Rising tide floats all boats.
Exactly. So that was the thesis that we had at the time, and it served us well for, well, at least for our duration of, for the most time we spent there at Sport Check. But I think it was, what was interesting about it was, it doesn't matter who you talk to on in the organization, whether the purchasing department, or even, you would even, like accounting was, I think we just had great relations with accounting, so they knew about marketing anyways because we're always asking for money. But they could also recite they could also recite where our core strategy or targeting strategy
Yeah.
was, and that was unique. That I've never come across that again, actually.
Yeah. Well, and it's a really good point to make, that I think a useful persona is the one that people know and
Yeah,
remember and understand.
great point.
Um, and so from that perspective, I think um, it's a challenge, I think, for personas, for us to say, well, this is, the marketing persona,
Yeah,
and then show up at like the sales team or the purchasing team or whoever, whatever other team, the legal team, even for that matter,
yeah,
and have them go, oh, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's nothing like the people that I see. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like there's got to be some validation internally, and collaboration in order to create these, that so that they are understood and realistic with what the rest of the business believes.
100%, 100%,
And that's it.
and that's and we're done.
But
Uh,
like, I think that's often overlooked, and if, and to that point, I do think it becomes strategic, and it's not just a mechanism for shaping production of content and messaging.
yeah,
It becomes a strategic component of decision making for the business, so that you do have the buyer, like the high end achiever. Let's go back to that one.
yeah,
You do have buyers that are buying products that would be expected from those high end achievers. Like they're not going to
totally.
buy the worst product and the cheapest thing in the market necessarily.
No,
There's going to be an expectation that you have all the latest and greatest and doohickeys and doodads for that group
yeah,
of people.
no, I agree. And I think one thing that for me, when it's done right, because I have to say, Sklar Wilton at the time did a fantastic job for us at SportCheck when they did come up with these audience segments.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a plug to Sklar, but I have to acknowledge that. But
Mm-hmm.
when you think about what are the types of, typically the types of research that is involved in doing such a robust analysis, like you have your demographics, you have your psychographics,
Yeah.
you're layering in behaviorals, motivation, pain points, even like we talked about earlier, the media used. So again, it's really kind of painting that picture of what that audience looks like, and even
Mm-hmm.
things like the purchasing process that they leverage at any point in time. Are they digitally savvy? Are they not digitally savvy?
Yeah.
All these things go into really creating both a audience segmentation, but also subsequently, if it because we
Yeah.
didn't have a persona at Check, but you could have layered on a persona that kind of brought this to life in a different way. But research,
Yeah. Well, and speaking of which, so the media, like, just talk about the media thing. I think this is where per, there's a whole bunch of challenges with personas, and in the in the case that I was just describing for the class,
mm-hmm.
I think I was getting hung up on a lot of the challenges. And I just, because I hadn't really thought about personas in such a long time,
Yeah.
that it didn't occur to me, like, some of the flaws in creating a persona. So, one of which is media choice. So
Yeah.
historically, we've seen, you were describing this, we've talked about it before, but like you might have, well, um, what was the name of your guy again?
Recreational Richard.
Recreational Richard. Who doesn't love Recreational Richard?
Right. Everybody knows a
Often seen
recreational Richard.
on often seen on thing channels such as Instagram, TSN,
Exactly.
things like that. But so I did some research for my segment and found, um, eMarketer is really good for a lot of this kind of stuff.
Mm.
Even Statista has a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But there's, uh, daily time spent with media.
Mm.
So you can see how much time spent with traditional, how much time is spent with digital. So the average French and German person spends roughly around 10 hours.
Hmm.
Uh, their percentage time with traditional media is a little bit higher than it is in North America. So
Hmm.
I think it was something like 5.5 hours traditional
Oh,
media and
interesting.
about 4.5 hours of digital media.
Sorry, and do they define traditional media in the same context that we do? So it's like you'd be your like out of home print, TV,
Yeah, I think so. Well,
radio.
unfortunately I don't have it handy, but I
That's fine.
for the most part I think it's TV. But even at that, that's still a good point because I don't know if they really define TV as being like is NetSuite TV, or are they talking about just broadcast TV, or is
I
it
don't
over
know.
the top? Like, because then there's
Yeah,
also YouTube, which you can target television sets with.
exactly.
So on the digital side, I was like, okay, I only have X number. We were estimating our revenue to be $10 million. So I'm working under a budget of $10 million for reach for two
Yeah,
countries. So how do you do that? And so let's say the recreational Richard guy was our target. So let's say he's either German or French. He's got 4.5 hours spent on digital media, 5.5 hours on traditional media. YouTube reaches like 83% or 90% of the
totally.
population or something like that. Same with Facebook, and Facebook's including Instagram and,
Yeah,
WhatsApp and Messenger. Um, and so, like, if everything reaches everybody,
totally.
what good does like how
No, you're
helpful
right.
is that to say that like in my case it wasn't, um recreational Richard, but something like that, like why, like where's the utility in that? Sometimes I think we're just creating persona biases based on our own desires. Like where I
No,
can reach them
and
is
I can't
different than
disagree.
what they do to consume information because they're consuming information on so many different platforms.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with you with that. And if recreational Richard was French, he'd be Richard. By the way,
Oh yeah, you're
um,
totally right.
but I can't disagree with you because when you have these mass channels that
Oh,
can,
that's good for me.
are we gonna leave it in? Yeah, we're leaving it
Yeah, yeah, totally.
um, when you have a lot of these channels that have such a large, I guess, audience or adoption, user rate, etc., call it what you want, but it's hard then to say and go but down this thing. Where does the persona actually help them?
Hmm.
You know, because in both of our products, technically, they're early in the life cycle. So we're faced with different challenges early in the life cycle of a product. So you want to try to build awareness as quickly as possible. You're trying to make sure that you can go into growth state as soon as possible. So you're
Hmm.
probably going to try to lean on the largest audience you can to do that early in your in the I guess your in the launch of your product. So you
Hmm.
can't overcomplicate it. You can't really hyper target because you're just trying to drive trial, you're trying to drive adoption, you're trying to drive purchase. And I think that's where maybe a persona
Hmm.
doesn't help
Hmm.
in a traditional sense. Maybe when you're full growth mode now that there's been an adoption, maybe you've achieved a market share of something, that then you can start really being a lot cheekier and say, okay, yeah, so
Hmm.
it's recreational Richard, it's active Adam, it's, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, and the creative that was going through my mind, like I could think about the, business traveler Bobby.
yeah,
The creative that was running through in my mind is you could have an individual person
yeah,
and their underwear changes as does the scenery in the background. I'm not a creative guy, so like I like creative, but I'm just trying to give you a visual, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So you could have one ad that showcases all these different types of travel that this particular guide, or you could have a couple, or you could have a family, or what, whatever the case may be. But one ad could do a lot of creative heavy lifting
yeah,
to convey the message that is targeting all these different things, all these different types of travel.
yeah,
So then I was like, huh, well, what now? Like,
now what?
what do I need all this other information for if I'm just targeting the need state as opposed to the individual people that I was trying to create personas for?
Like I said, I can't rebuttal that, because you're right. I think it's a wasted exercise, in especially in your use case. It wouldn't add something that you can't already do, either potentially through creative, where you're showing the versatility of the product, or the messaging that you may add to it as well. It's hard to make a case why a persona for that specific use case actually makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Um,
There is one thing though that is important to, and I think you came across this in your research. What is a general rule of thumb in terms of like how many personas or too many personas? What is kind
right.
of like that right number? And I think, just looking at the notes here, I think it was called like 4 to 6 is kind of like the sweet spot.
hmm
How does that actually, in your experience, is that what you've seen as well?
I mean, you described the ones in Sport Check. That I think there was 5 that you mentioned or something. So I think that fits within what I've seen in the past. Then you get to this other side of that conversation, and you hear a whole bunch of people more and more often talking about mass customization. And so you have this idea of one-to-one marketing.
Yeah.
So that would be like personas to an extreme. And like we've both done research on this, and I've run media campaigns against it, and it's not as effective as targeting the whole category based
Yeah.
on our results that we had. It costs a lot more to try and target each person individually. So there's
Yeah.
like, I don't know where the sweet spot is. I think, for it to be meaningful, I think it needs to somehow link back to business strategic objectives. And often there's a market segmentation dollar value
Hmm.
associated with the persona.
Yeah.
So whether
Yeah.
the persona is exclusively based on a demographic or a gender, or just a cluster audience segment, I think it has to somehow link back to the financial opportunity that exists for the company, and by going after that segment.
And the reality is, like, you can do that with, again, if we bring up sport check, you can really do that with a really strong segmentation analysis, where the persona itself, again, it's bringing that segmentation to life, but the persona itself isn't really adding maybe much more than you would have already had, right?
Yeah,
And I don't know, maybe we spend some time getting into some of the challenges with personas. You
sure,
want to talk about that a little bit?
sure. Well, what do you think would be? Is there
Well, the
like
first
one that
one,
sticks out for you?
yeah, I think it's like an oversimplification, if you will, of the people that it represents, because you're trying
hmm
to create a biography or some traits or some behaviors that is maybe true for us, maybe a small populace, but maybe is not just an oversimplification or an ideal state that
hmm
maybe isn't really true. So I think you have to be careful in terms of what these personas are actually meant to do for you as it
hmm
informs your targeting strategy. So the one I
hmm
would call out is obviously the oversimplification that they can present.
Yeah. There's
How
this
about
other
you?
rule from Ehrenberg Bass. I don't know what their actual rule is called. I think it's just called brand user profiles seldom differ. And
Hmm.
so this is another thing that was messing me up when I was thinking about this. But the the law generally says that in most markets, um, the mix of customers that you have, unless like for underwear, if I have men's and women's products, my mix of customers, of actual
Hmm.
customers, is probably a good reflection of all the other brands in the category.
Right.
So
Right.
the and if they're not, it's because like we don't sell women's underwear or we only sell men's underwear or whatever the scenario is, right?
Right.
And so um the I think the challenge or one of the potential pitfalls of doing a segmentation is thinking that your personas are somehow differentiated, and that by
Yeah.
acquiring more of those,
It's
you're going to get you're building a
a
strategic
great point.
competitive advantage.
Hmm.
Because I think you end up potentially just restricting unknowingly
Yeah.
your potential for growth by
That's a
only
great point.
appealing to small, like a potentially small portion of the market,
Yeah.
smaller portion of the market than you need to.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very, very, very astute observation, because at the end of the day, when you think about the alienation, and I was going to bring up a third, I guess a third one in
Do it.
succession here, was like stereotype and confirmation bias. Like naturally, these personas are really kind of build this profile that are naturally going to be could be very stereotypical.
Yeah.
If you remember, again, back to, I'm picking on Czech today, but that's okay. When we did the athleisure movement, right?
Yeah.
If you think about like the segmentation analysis that was coming in at that time, is like everyone's leaning into athleisure. It's more about being inclusive, et cetera, et cetera. But that's again, that's maybe over stereotyping, over generalizing an entire segment that may not truly apply, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's important too when you think about how are you bringing this persona to life, and what is it actually meant to do to help in that, your targeting strategy.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's a good example, I think, of being more strategic, whether you agree or not with the idea. But like, I remember at the time they were bringing a lot more athleisure product
Yeah,
and getting rid of some of like the hardcore product,
yeah,
because they wanted to have the inventory and the size curves and all that kind of stuff for the person that wanted to wear their Adidas
yeah,
zip up, um, on a weekend while they're watching a movie on a couch, as opposed to the person who's, I don't know, playing hockey and or whatever,
yeah,
doing yoga instead
yeah,
of just watching TV. So yeah, it was interesting because they did align the product assortment to support
yeah.
that directional shift.
I'm trying to think of another one there. Biggest danger actually is maybe them not even being updated frequently enough.
Mm,
Because you think
yep.
about Andrea Olson, we've talked to about, I think we talked to Jennifer about it as well.
Hmm.
When you're not engaging and updating a lot of this customer research that helps
Hmm.
inform strategic direction, both from a business and a marketing perspective, you run the risk of maybe missing an opportunity. And
Hmm.
I think Jennifer brought a great example, I think most recent podcast, just around asking your sales team how
Hmm.
something may land. They're the ones closest to that. But if you're not having that open dialogue and you're living in these organizational silos, unfortunately, you may be going down this path of a um I don't know, of a targeting strategy that maybe is now lost
Yeah.
touch with what the actual reality of it is.
Yeah. That's a great point. I think that's a really good point because yeah, it's in a lot of ways. I think it's an assumption, right? And like a persona, you have an assumption that this is accurate. Even like the ones done with the best research and intentions and most statistically significant findings that you could ever possibly get. It's a series of assumptions that are kind of coalescing into this persona, and so
Yeah.
the market is dynamic. It's constantly changing. Um, I mean, we talked about this with Jennifer a while back, but you were the biggest fan of BlackBerry for the longest time, and
Still
then you
kind of
weren't.
am. I just wish. Anyways, it's a
But
soft
there's
spot.
there's changes in the market that you can't just that force you um, to really reevaluate whether market forces change the persona or not. Like I think at the very least you probably need to check in on them to make sure all the
Yeah.
assumptions are correct at
Yeah.
least once a year.
No, I'm with you. So actually, I think that dovetails perfectly into a question I have here for you. So, do we need personas like a Tiny Tim, the 42-year-old active dad, or are we better off just really thinking about the high-end achiever description of a target market? What is your take on that?
I I started this assignment thinking like, yeah, personas are awesome. I'm gonna do a
To
persona.
the
And
shit?
then I got to the point where I'm like, I don't think a traditional persona like the Tiny Tim 42-year-old active dad was helpful at all for me.
Yeah,
So understanding the cluster that I'm trying to go after and I'm not saying that it's not important to do the research. I think that's really important. I just don't think you need to always have a picture of a person with their name and a description of their age, gender,
traits.
traits, and what they like for dinner, and that they drive this kind of a car and they listen to this
Yeah,
kind of radio station, or they're huge Taylor Swift fans. Like, I don't know that
of
that's as
course.
productive as I used to think it. Well, definitely it's not as productive as I used to think it was.
Hmm.
um but if that is a useful way to segment the market for somebody, because they need to reach all the Taylor Swift fans who are named Tiny Tim and 42-year-old dads, then I think
Quit
that's a
profiling me, Mark.
I don't know, what do you think?
um, it's funny because I want to say this the right way. I kind of like personas. I kind of
Yeah.
like the visual representation that they can create in my mind as a marketer. I think it helps me kind of bring my targeting strategies to life. It kind of gives me a North Star in some context.
Hmm.
Not saying like just a target market can provide like a North Star. Knowing like there's a recreational Richard out there
Yeah.
that is just for me, it just creatively it works differently for me. So
Sure.
I think there is value in personas. However, I think through this discussion, through the exercise, through class, one thing that I'm realizing is maybe understanding and being able to differentiate when they're actually needed and when they're not needed.
Hmm.
And I think one thing that I've come to realize is a persona is an added, I don't want to say an added bonus, but it's like it's an addition to a really strong targeting strategy that you've created,
Hmm.
but you can't have one without the other. So if you just have a persona, I would argue you don't really have a target market or a targeting strategy. However, if you have a target market, you could probably get away without having a persona.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Like,
A persona isn't enough for me.
yeah, I agree. You're thinking back to the conversation we had with Brent, um,
Mm,
how he was talking about was 6.1, I think it was the number of decision makers in a
yeah,
B2B decision.
yeah,
So you could create personas for the people within your ideal customer profile, which may be more like a uh, firmographics of the
yeah.
ideal customer, like the kind of company you're trying to target. Within that company, though, he was saying there's roughly, I think it was 6.1. So maybe the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, whatever, the C-suite,
Then I think he
and a
said that it
consultant.
grew too, though,
Yeah.
until,
And then
until
he's
they
like, yeah, it was like somebody called me a liar, and I thought they were going to say I was too high. And they're like, no, you're not anywhere
it's
close to high
11,
enough. I think it was 15 or 11. I'm
15
like,
or yeah,
well, and then at that point, how useful is that? Right. So anyway, I think you can get too far down the path with personas where you falsify differences just to confirm your own
yeah,
thoughts.
yeah.
I think it's better to have fewer than more, and provided that they're representative of the sample of the target market you're going after.
Hmm.
Um, I think you can create personas any way you want, as long as it makes business sense.
Yeah, I think the only now, see, now I'm going to sound like you. I think now where I'm starting to struggle with this is like how committed are you to them? Right.
Yeah.
So like, how often are you updating? How often are you updating your customer research? Because if you're setting up a point of time, these say 6 personas, which make really great sense. But if you don't revisit it every, I don't know, every year, every couple of years, then are you actually doing yourself a disservice in the ability that, hey, we're killing this high end achiever, and we're still chasing this, but does that actually align? And I think that's where now I'm starting to have some of these second thoughts, and I'm like, oh, does it just help me creatively?
Yeah.
Because like it helps me think about the messaging and things like that
Yeah.
differently, versus is it actually adding value? Could I do that? Could I do that exercise differently or through another
Mm-hmm.
source? I can't think of something right now off the top of my head, but there's a part of me that thinks that maybe I could. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, this is a good conversation, V. Like I really, yeah, it's one of those things, like I said at the beginning, it's just something that we just all do and assume that it's the right way to do it. And
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm less convinced that creating the Tiny Tim 42-year-old active dad persona is
Mm-hmm.
effective than I thought. I don't think it's as
Creatively.
effective as I used to think it was.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think just mostly because I've had a lot of time to actually think about how I would use it. But it's not to say it's ineffective. I think it just has to be, you have to be careful with how you're going to use the information.
Yeah. And what is it used to inform? Like, is it just used to inform, say, maybe content? Is it used to inform uh, further like hyper targeting? I know I didn't want to jump down the rabbit hole that is like mass personalization, one-to-one marketing, et cetera, because I think that's just a hog of shit.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. It is a trap. And I don't want to use our time on that right now. But I think that's where, again, you have to be very, very careful on how you're bringing that to life and what is it that you're actually trying to do by creating a persona. Because it
Mm-hmm.
could also, maybe it could misdirect you as well, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
if the largest opportunity is under a very large target segment, doing that next layer of finding the tiny Tim, the 42-year-old, may be going too far. Like, do you really need to find Tiny Tim? Really?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that actually adding to your, you know, to your targeting strategy, and what is that going to do? The
Yeah.
only the only thing I would rebuttal against myself now would just be like thinking about things like brand campaigns versus say performance marketing campaigns, which
Mm-hmm.
performance marketing campaigns will naturally try to find, some of those unique audience that can convert at a higher rate. Yes, it's going to cost you more, but that needs to be balanced with maybe those broader targeting strategies or those um, segments, and maybe some of those brand campaigns live in that space a lot more. So that's that's another way to kind of see how they both kind of work hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you got to be careful. You don't overly want to do too much hyper targeting on the performance marketing side either, because that's not beneficial and it costs you a shitload of money that you should be spending anyways.
Yeah. Good thought.
Let's see what
Yeah.
the audience thinks.
Well, if you got any ideas or thoughts, please let us know. Feel free to shoot us a note. Because this is just an ongoing conversation. I think it's worthwhile to have. But yeah, happy to carry on the conversation on whatever LinkedIn comments or whatever you want to do. So please let us know.
Yeah.
And V,
Yes.
it's
No
time
post
to
pod
bid
today.
adieu.
It
No, this
is.
was it. The whole thing was the post pod.
That's right. That's fair. That's a good point. So you guys get less time with us today, but hopefully this was like extremely powerful for you.
Awesome.
All right, buddy.
All right, V, take it easy.
Have yourself a great day.
You do. Bye.